Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman Podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Jojy.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today, Alyssa and I are very excited to welcome Nancy Reddy, the author of the Good Mother Myth, to our podcast. We are so excited to welcome Nancy and have a very robust, I think, conversation about the crossroads of becoming a new mom and trying to fulfill the expectations of what you think that means and how that may set us up for success or failure. And we're going to unpack all of these different things. So welcome to our podcast, Nancy.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Thanks. So I'm so excited to find out. So just as a way of introduction, Nancy, you have a PhD in English and you did an MFA in poetry. But yet what I was fascinated about this book is really the psychology and the focus on the research that you use in every chapter as you outlined the ideas that you did in every chapter. So I'm so interested to find out, how did that come about? Was that, trying to find your sanity as you were a new mom, trying to put your research skills to good use since you we're just finishing up your dissertation? So walk us through that. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's very much, I think, what I was doing, trying to just make sense of my own life and what had happened to me. I just, so I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I was just in Madison earlier this month doing some book events and saw, several of the people who'd been my mentors in graduate school and kind of felt like, well, this is not the book that I was trained to write. It's not a scholarly monograph. But I really did use all of the skills that I learned, in those courses and in my dissertation to do the research, to really think, not just what happened to me, but also like, where did these ideas come from? Why did I have this image of what it would mean to be a good mother and, kind of what's underneath that? And I feel like it's that habit of mind maybe coming out of my research background that really animates the book, as well as just for myself. I entered motherhood thinking that I could study and learn and figure out how to do it correctly the way that I had with just about everything else in my life, and was pretty blindsided that that's not actually how it works.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that as your first chapter unfolds, I think every mom who's reading your book is going to be like, that's me. She's talking about me. How did she know that experience? And I bet, and I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you've met some moms that during your book tours and things like that, or your conversations, that don't believe that they had that kind of experience. Have you met somebody who had the perfect mom experience yet?
I don't think so. I mean, let me know if someone is out there, please let me know. I mean, I think for me, or maybe not, I don't know if that would help me at this point. For me, part of what's been so meaningful about being able to share this book is that I really did. I mean, I struggled so much when my first son was born. And part of what made that so hard was really feeling like I was alone, like I was surrounded by these other mothers who all seemed like they were just kind of sailing through, or maybe they had a couple of struggles here or there, but it was always the line of like, oh, but, I just love him so much and it makes everything worth it. I was like, I don't know. I mean, there are times when I'm up in the middle of the night and I'm not sure if anything is worth it, And I think the more that new parents, and especially maybe mothers, share the reality of the things that are hard and the things that are joyful, the better it is for all of us.
I remember a friend of mine she had her son about like 5 years ago, but I remember in the first probably 6
Yeah.
months, she had said those exact
Yeah.
words to me, like, "Why didn't anyone tell me how hard it is?" And it's like, I think at that point, I had 2 kids. No, I had 2 kids, and I was pregnant with my 3rd. And so I was like, well, first time parenthood is really hard. And I didn't feel like I had the perfect parenting journey. But I have found for me, like right now in this space, due
Mm.
to other factors, this is the hardest time for me,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is, we'll kind of maybe get into that,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I think that everybody has their different journeys. And a lot of times we kind of have that point. My journey is
Mm-hmm.
more challenging right now because I'm burned out from work and from life, and there's just a lot in the mix. And so I'm finding it that the way that I want to parent, the way that I want to be as a mother is not what I want
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact of those external factors. So I think that it's a really I think that it hits really hard initially because there is this kind of myth, which is obviously what your book is all about. But I think that there's also the challenges that continue through our parenthood, or not our parenting journey as a
Yeah, I think
mother,
that's really
that
real.
doesn't
I mean, it's so
necessarily get
tricky, right?
addressed
That thing of
either.
like, what do we say to other women, other people who are headed into parenthood for the first time? Because I think, we don't want to scare people. I had the experience of doing a book event a couple weeks ago and signing books for 2 different pregnant women who were so great and so excited. And like, that is so wonderful. And I was kind of like, okay, like, it's going to be like, what do I say to you? Because you're going to start this book and maybe be scared. But I do feel like if we don't share things in a more real way, we're also kind of doing it a service. So it does feel like a really tricky balance of being honest about, here's what was hard for me. You may have a different experience. And to me, the important message is something like, if things are hard for you, that's not your fault. And I think that's a message that would have really made a difference for me as a new mother.
And that makes me think of what I have learned to say now that I'm, my daughter is going to be 29 this year, is um, having your first child, or having any child for that matter, is like the most intense love you will feel, and also
Mm-hmm.
the most intense fear you will feel. And
Mm-hmm.
and they occur simultaneously. Like that to me is like motherhood. It's like, and I know that feeling of wondrous love that you said, doesn't necessarily happen the way the psychologists say it's going to happen, is, I think, true. But there is that, you want to protect this child. If nothing else, you're scared that under your watch something will happen to this child. And so there's that protectiveness, whether that's love or not. But I do feel like it's that responsibility that, I think, kept me up at night. It's like, how did somebody think I was ready to be a mom? Like, I can't believe somebody gave me, this responsibility. And so I do feel like we go through all those different emotions, and I don't know. I don't think we should scare anybody, but not to say that you shouldn't be scared, because you
Yeah,
should.
I know. It's such a hard, I mean, I think I wonder if that's one of the universals of very early parenthood, is like going home from the hospital and having your baby for the first time, being like, wait, really? I'm the one in charge? Like, I'm the mom now? That feeling of like, oh man, no one's here to check and make sure that I'm doing this right. Is on me now.
But one of the things that I'm curious about for us to
Yeah.
talk
And
about is that, why do we, in those most stressful moments, compare ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
this perfect image of what that should look like? Like, we are at the lowest point we can be because we're tired, and breastfeeding isn't perfect for most women, and your body is still like, doesn't feel like your own, and all these different things. Your hormones are everywhere. Your partner doesn't know how they fit into this situation because they can't really help you a lot. They can with some things, but not with
Mm-hmm.
things that, we are necessary for. And yet why do we hold ourselves to this image that, you know, maybe it's we don't know enough, but I'm curious, like, why do you two think that we still keep that in the back of our minds that it was supposed to be different somehow?
I mean, it's such a good question. I think that parenting in the US especially can just be so isolating. And I think that so many of us are a lot of us are raising kids without having had like a lot of kids in our own life, if that makes sense. Like I didn't really babysit very much. I had cousins who were my age, but there weren't that many other kids in my family. I didn't have a lot of hands-on baby experience. I didn't have family nearby when I had my sons. And so I feel like we're really looking for someone to help us figure out how to do it. And right now, a lot of those models are like women on Instagram, who look like they are doing it correctly and who are giving advice about how to do it, the right way. And I feel like what we actually really need is more community and more support. And instead we get, as you say, these like models of how to do it right that almost inevitably just make us feel worse.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, like, so I'm listening to this Rockstar Mom Summit. This is what I've been doing the whole last week. So I'm very inundated with a lot of the concepts that they put on for that summit.
Mhm.
But the main theme that kept coming up was community. And one of the speakers talked about how she has just an open Friday night, like potluck, where she invites her friends and their kids. And they, like she said, sometimes my house is clean, sometimes it's not. People just come and we bring food and we just create this community. And
Mhm.
I was like, I turned to my husband, I'm like, let's do this. And so our first one didn't go well because everyone got sick and nobody could come, but it's okay because I was like, next Friday, we're going to try it again. But I do think that the community, and I was going to say, I'm also a recovering perfectionist. So I think a lot of times I have had to, just by nature of having 4 children, let go of some of the perfectionist things to create though, like to overcome those barriers, because I didn't want to invite people over because my house wasn't perfect. I didn't want to ask for help because I can do it myself. I'm a super mom. And like I said, I'm burned out and I'm kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, no, we can't do this anymore. This is not sustainable. And so now I'm making those changes to do that. But it has been a 10-year journey because literally that's my oldest will be 10 next month. So I think that a lot of times we are so much in the mindset of I can't ask for help. I
Mhm.
should be able to do this on my own. Why is this so hard? But everybody is so different, and it's harder for some people in some aspects, but not others. Like I have another friend who she is really calm when things like literally milk is spilled. Like she's really calm. She's like, it's okay, like no big deal. Me, like you would think the world had ended when the milk is spilled because I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I don't have time for this. I gotta get all of you out of the house. Like, let's go. Like, bleh. It's a mess. But I am really calm in like really high stress situations where it's like really those are the points where other people might break. And that's where I'm like, I got this. We're okay. We're gonna get through this. So I think everybody also has their differences of their strengths and being able to say, I can do this. I can do hard things, but those hard things are different for each person. So it's
Mm.
hard to know with a
I
new
also feel
mom,
like
for
that, like,
example,
even just
how
that
that's
story
going to
right
hit.
now also reveals, like, the gift of seeing someone else's parenting up close, right? Because if you were just texting with her, if you only saw her, like, when your house was perfectly clean and everything was great, like, you wouldn't know those things about each other, right? I feel like like, you're able to reflect on who she is as a parent and who you are as a parent because you both kind of, like, been messy together. And I feel like that's really how we connect and how we're able to I mean, I think of the times in my own life where I've seen someone else parent in a way and thought like, "Wow, I'm not judging her for that. Why would I judge myself for acting in that way?" And I feel like that's such a it's important for relationships, but I think it's also important for how we understand ourselves.
And I want to contribute that I feel like that judgment word is a really big one. The other thing that I thought about when I was reading your book is about like when going back to work and the whole process of um, making it through finding like deciding you want to go back to work, because I definitely am. And I can let Alyssa speak for herself, but I definitely was the mom that could barely survive 6 weeks of maternity leave. Like,
Mm.
I could not handle, like, I would have done anything to go back to work in a couple of weeks. I mean, I'd never felt so alone. My husband was able to go back to work and get a routine, and I was stuck with his child that I didn't know when it was going to cry, when it was going to sleep, and all of that kind of stuff. Um, having and I talk about judgment because I feel like since during that time and since then, like you run into people, your family, your parents, whether they're trying their best, but they don't understand who you really are, maybe. Like everybody just treats you like you're supposed to want to do this. And you're not supposed to want to go back to work, even if you need to go back to work. It's almost like you should feel sorry. You should apologize for having to go to work. Well, I didn't want to apologize. I was really
Mm-hmm.
happy to go back to work. And yet I felt like, I didn't know um, that I could trust everybody with my child. That was definitely true. But I wanted to believe that so that I could go. But there were plenty of people who made me feel bad about it, that like I had no remorse for the fact that I had a graduate degree and I wanted to use it and not apologize for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that made me feel really, really badly. I actually moved into one subdivision when my daughter was 5 years old, who said, you're the only woman who works outside the house.
Oh my goodness.
And I was just like, who are you people? Like, where did you come from?
Exactly.
And that was like my first introduction to them for an Easter, egg hunt. And they sort of cornered me and said, and I was like really taken aback because I thought that we as women had moved past all that.
Yeah.
And yet we hadn't. And so what do you think the role of judging other women or not being able to accept that, that not everybody has to be the same? What do you think interferes with that?
Oh man. I mean, that's such a big question because I do think like optimally there would be space for everyone to make the decision that makes sense for them, right? And I think I too, would have just jumped out of my skin if I hadn't been able to go back to work. And I had the I don't know, blessing, kind of mixed good fortune that I was in graduate school at the time, so my work was flexible to some extent. It wasn't like, I think about I have a cousin who is an attorney and she had her baby and she had 6 months maternity leave, but when she was done with it, she was back in an office like 10, 12 hours a day every day. And that I think is really a tough way to like ramp right back into working motherhood. The judgment is so tough. And I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. I don't understand why we do it. I mean, I think about, I love my kids and I'm so glad I had them. And I cannot imagine telling someone else they should have kids. I know that's another thing that women who don't want kids, don't have kids often get. And I just can't imagine trying to convince anyone that they should do this if it wasn't really what they wanted to do. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I guess I don't know why we do it, why women do it. I mean, some portion of it must be kind of looking anxiously at the choices that other women have made and wondering if, does that mean something about me? Am I doing something right? Are they doing something right? I think a lot of us are raised, I certainly was, always with an eye on other women to kind of try to figure out, am I doing the right thing? Is she doing the right thing? How do we measure up? And it's so bad. It's so bad for community. It's bad for families. It's bad for all of us. But I don't have an answer to that. I'd love to know what you think, or what you think, Elisa.
Well, and I think like what you just said is probably what comes to my mind, because I think that a lot of times we're put ourselves in these boxes. And I mean, I remember very early on, like, I wanted to do things. And it kind of, I was living in a community where it was like the working moms versus the stay-at-home moms. I think that was such a horrible, like, thing because it did divide us and it didn't create a community. And they were like, hey, we're going to have play group at 9 a.m. on Friday. And I was like, well, but I can't do that because I work. And they're like, oh, well, that's when we have it because the weekend is for our family. So we do it during the week when we have time. And I was like, okay, but could we have like maybe like a Saturday morning to like for those of us who can't do it? And they were like, no, and so there was kind of like this like very early on for me, this dynamic of I can't do it with them. So now I need to find other working moms who then can do this and make my own group. And, I did that for a bit where I made my own mom's group and like called it the Working Moms Group, which again, not like a total divide, but it was like I needed to find other people like me who understood the dynamic of I work and then, only have evenings and weekends to get together with other people. And so I think that sometimes we put ourselves in these boxes where we say, well, I'm doing this and this is right versus wrong, or, that judgment starts to seep in because of that. So I think that it again, like you said, it creates such a divide within the community. And it took me a long time to be able to say, we're all working, like some of us are working in a like job and some of us are working at home, but it's all working.
Exactly.
Well, nobody's just not doing anything. But I think that a lot of times just logistics divide us. And then I think that the judgment comes in of, am I doing it right? Like you said. So I think that that's all part of it. And then, I think that we also a lot of times look at things like, some people have a chip on their shoulder. Like I'm doing this, so this is better than somebody else. And so then that judgment does come in. I think for me, I've fostered and created a community where people are not judging me. And that has helped me to reduce my own judgment because I don't have people saying those sort of things.
I will say that one of the best gifts I got was me. She's actually a very good friend of mine. And she very honestly says, she was the first person I met who didn't have children. And she said, well, I knew I didn't want to have children. And not because she didn't think she was going to be a good mom. She just never desired any children. And I mean, that was like a new paradigm for me. I was like, oh, like you can choose not to have a child? Because truthfully, that wasn't ever an option that was given to me. Like I had never met anybody who didn't have children. I knew people who couldn't have children and everybody felt sorry for them, quote unquote, but not somebody who had, she and her partner had made a decision not to have any children for their whatever reason. And I was like, wow, I don't know. Then you start thinking about like, if I had had that choice, would I have chosen to have a child? Like, I don't know. And it broadened my perspective to realize that, yeah, there are some people out there that have that choice and, make the choice. And these are people who, and then when you do have children and you make a choice, then I feel like, okay, so then you have to take the responsibility of now living up to that responsibility, right? Because you chose to have this child. And so I thought that was, and I hate to say it, I mean, I was probably 30 some years old when I met this person who sort of taught me that not everybody wants to have a child. I mean, that was really a novel idea for me. I don't know about you ladies, but it definitely was for me.
No, it's wild. I mean, I think about the way, and I'm so grateful, my own mom was a working mom. She was a single mom through much of my childhood. And I'm so grateful for that model that I just always assumed that I would be able to combine work and motherhood. Like that just didn't even occur to me that I would not work after having kids. But I did, as you're saying, and I feel like I probably had that realization recently too, like, oh, I always assumed that I would have kids. And like, what if, I don't know, maybe there is a parallel version of my life out there somewhere where I'm doing something else. I don't know. Because I mean, I think when I think about how my mom talked to me about like my adulthood when I was a kid, she was very careful to talk about education. She said, go to college, you'll go to graduate school, and then you can get married and then you'll have some kids. But it was always like kids were the ultimate kind of destination. And I'm so glad that I have my kids, but I also don't think that I ever really thought that maybe I wouldn't, like that was just never something it was really more a matter of when, than would I. And I talk to my kids very differently. We often say, if you want to have kids or when you're grown up, these are some of the things that you can do. We have several good friends who are really important people in our kids' lives who don't have kids. And I think that's a useful model for them to be able to see like, oh, Anna and John, like, look at this wonderful life they have. And they don't have kids. And that's a perfectly valid way to be an adult.
No.
I'm listening to, what you're both saying, and I actually didn't plan it any way, shape, or form. I think I was very career driven. And so I had the mentality of I'm going to like reach my career goals and then maybe get married after that and maybe have a kid or two. Uh, and here I am with four. So a very different kind of trajectory in that it was like, this is definitely a possibility, but not something I ever really thought about or planned until it came about. And so I think for me, it was kind of a shock, but also like, oh, this is how it is, and this is my life, and I've adjusted to that. Go.
So what I was thinking about, Nancy, is that your mom was a working mom. My mom was also a working mom, and Alyssa, I know your mom was also involved in your family business, and so I feel like all three of us had that role model of a woman who found a balance, and sometimes the balance was a good balance, and in my family, sometimes it wasn't a good. I mean, my mom definitely was more of a work-minded woman, and then we sort of fit into that lifestyle. But I feel like looking back at my raising my daughter, I knew that there would be a time where I could refocus on my work. Like I've always been career minded, but I also knew, and I'm grateful for that knowing because I knew, you know what, I'm going to be able to have an empty nest period. I'm going to be able to see where, my husband and I will get our life back and we will be able to invest in each other. And that, and we only had one. And so, or I only have one. And so it was sort of like, okay, there'll be a time where we'll have time together again to reestablish. And I was thinking about as a therapist, one of the hardest things I had, which I say broke me from being a therapist, was having like a 40-year-old some woman who didn't know how to recreate themselves because their children were leaving home. I didn't know what to do with these women because whatever you would try to talk to them about, do you want to go back to school? What do you have as a hobby? Do you want to try this? Maybe your husband can reconnect. Like it was just like they had spent so much time living for their children that now they were like hopeless because their spouse had filled in their last 18, 20 years of their marriage with something else to do, whether it was golfing or whatever, his friends. And they just were unprepared for this time. And I just thought, how did you end up this way? Like, you had a life, you had an identity before you got married and you had children, and you just have to go back and recreate that, right? And so I was really grateful that I had that to look forward to, sometime. And I was a really young mom. And so because I only had one, I mean, I actually knew for a long time that when I was 46, my daughter would graduate from high school and she'd go to college. And I was really looking forward to being a young empty nester. And I have really taken advantage of that. And I do enjoy that time. But I do think about those women that I worked with that just couldn't figure out what to do with themselves. And I think that's a really hard place to be. They did break me, but I do feel their pain of not being able to know who are they going to be now. What do you guys think about that idea?
I mean, those are women who, I don't know, who are responding to, I think, the same cultural pressures that made especially early motherhood so tough for me and maybe just went a different way with it, right? I feel like because my work was so important to me and my writing and just like my sense of myself as a person distinct from a mother, that was all really felt in a lot of ways like it was at odds with what I was supposed to be doing as a mother, like I would see these Instagram posts by women that I knew who would talk about spending nap time just like gazing at their baby's face. And like, that is a beautiful thing. But I was like, no, I have to get up. I have to do things. I have work to do. I have, which is in some ways not actually a super healthy response. But all that to say, I don't know. I feel like those women were responding to the same pressures and just went a different way. But it's like if you subsume yourself in service of your children for 18, 20, 25 years, of course you're going to be unrecognizable to yourself on the other side of that. I mean, it sounds like those are women who were being really, kind of in heavy scare quotes, like good mothers, um, and who maybe stopped knowing anything about who they were as a person, which is so scary to me.
I mean, I don't think like I have heard, because when I hear like a lot of those conversations where they're saying, I just don't know what my identity is, and I'm sitting there when I've heard that and saying,
Mm.
well, I don't know what my identity is as a mother, but I know who I am as a career person, as the work that I do for my living. I know who I am as like the kind of friend that I want to be, but the kind of mother that I want to be is not clear cut. So it's almost the opposite of that. But I think that like again, we all kind of have our journey and it looks different. But I think that I didn't ever only label myself as a mother. I labeled myself probably secondary as a mother and first my career. And again, some of that is from what I said, like I was very career oriented up until now, where I'm actually making the shift back to, hey, my kids are only going to be small for a period of time, and my career can't be everything, because if I continue on that trajectory, I'm going to miss out. And I think some of the conversations that Jojy and I have had, some of this has been very eye opening to getting me there. And that's really why we do this podcast, is because we're trying to kind of open Pandora's box on topics that don't always get light shown on them. And this is one of those that for some of us who are so career oriented, you may do the opposite of what those women did, in that you work so hard that you lose out on your children's childhood and all that.
I mean, and that's where I think like your comment about not putting ourselves into boxes is so helpful, right? That like working mom or stay-at-home mom are not actually, that there's got to be more flexibility and fluidity in that. I think in my own life, like I'm in a period of intense like travel and book stuff right now, and I'm a professor, so I'm teaching. It's the semester, like this is a really, really busy time with me. And, my husband is picking up a lot of the slack with our kids and at our house. And then in the summer, things will calm down and I will spend a lot more time with my kids, which is a unique kind of a thing with a schedule. Certainly not everyone's work life works that way, but I think it's, I don't know, more helpful maybe to think in terms of seasons, right? The like, can you step back a little bit and make a little more space for your kids, knowing that, as Jojy was pointing out, they're not going to be there forever. And there's another life on the other side of, your children's childhood.
And I think that, a lot of times, like looking at it from where I am now, I always knew that the goal of parenting and becoming a mother was to launch my child into her own life, her own choices, right? I mean, I think that being a perfect mom in my mind was creating a household or a home life that was free of judgment, and saying to her, you have the potential to do whatever you want. You will not always live here. You will have your own decisions to make. You will have your own career, your own money, your own decisions. And what I have is what I have, and what you will have something of your own. And so my job is to prepare you for that. And I think that that's also really important, that, that as moms, we realize that, there will be a time where it ends and you have to let them go. And I have known moms, as we went through high school and went through college, and, our kids were launched and now they're working. Like some moms really had a hard time with the fact that their kids didn't move back home, or, they don't live closer to them now. And maybe it's because, my husband and I are both transplants from a different state. And so I didn't live close to my parents. And, that was just all what I knew. So it's not foreign to me. But, I sort of feel like if you keep the prize at the end is that your kids become independent, and that's what we want for them. We're not looking to create enmeshed people and we're all going to live together for the rest of our lives. I mean, and I think of that as like a very freeing kind of a thing. But I think that there are some people who think that, the extended family and everybody living close and sort of keeping that. I mean, maybe that's ideal for some people, but it's not ideal for all of us. And so, like, understanding that part of this is really about, your kids being successful looks different in every family, and just opening your mind to that a little bit more, and showing your kids that it could take lots of different forms, right? There's no perfect way to do this.
I think that's such a helpful perspective. And certainly my mom raised me, and I think was explicit in, that I'm raising you to be a person, right? To learn how to be independent, to discover what you want to do. And I teach a lot of college freshmen, which I love, and feels like a really kind of constant reminder of what students are like or what people are like when they're just on the other side of that, and some of them, I have students every fall whose mothers are still like checking their email for them and sometimes like calling them to wake them up in the morning in their dorm room. And I think, that is not like, what do I do to make sure that my kids are not doing that? Because that is not who I will be when they're 18. And then I also have kids who are like such interesting, smart people and so motivated and like really making the most of that first stage of independence. So it feels really useful for my parenting to get to see in some ways kind of the results of other people's parenting from that perspective every fall.
Absolutely. Now, I can't believe that we're already close to 40 minutes of recording. And so I guess one of the things I wanted definitely to talk to you, Nancy, about is, what was your intention when you wrote this book? And what do you want our listeners and people who come across this recording to take away from this book? Because it's so beautifully titled, The Good Mother Myth. I mean, what was your intention, and what do you hope that our listeners and other people who read your book and find your book, and I hope that your book is a huge success, what do you want them to take away from this book?
Thank you. I mean, the biggest thing for me is just that some of the most meaningful, joyful experiences of my life have been through motherhood. And so I don't want to give that short shrift at all. But also some of the hardest experiences. And those have also been usually because I was trying to live up to someone else's ideal. And I think when we think about what it means to be a good mom, it's almost always about what someone else thinks we should be doing. And I feel like we've talked a lot about that. Or the kinds of narratives that we've inherited about what that is. And I think that when we try to be good in that way, it takes us away from the real joy and meaning of getting to know our own kids, getting to know ourselves as parents, building relationships. And so, I don't know, my major argument suggestion is to try to turn away from those outside narratives and instead to, really focus on like the particular people that you're getting to raise, because there's so much just wonder and power in that, I think.
To be honest with you, whatever conversation that Elisa and I have, I think that is a common thread across all the topics, which is that if you're trying to live up to somebody else's expectation for fill in the blank, you will be disappointed, and you will be disappointed in yourself.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's a life lesson, right? Like I wrote a book, the memoir section of the book is really the first 2 years of motherhood. And I think in some ways it could feel maybe for a reader like, oh, well, she learned that lesson, before her first son turned 2. And that's not the intention. It's not true, I don't think. I feel like that's the same lesson that I'm always learning and trying to think about, as my kids get older, as I continue to, learn things about myself, is really, how do I pay more attention to what I value, who I want to be, what my kids need, than all of these ideas circulating about what we all should be doing.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because I think that, again, that idea of like what the shoulds, it's such a hard one, because we feel in so many ways because of how society, what society tells us, what we see in the media, what we kind of view as a good mom, or, whatever title you put to that, because I know that we have a lot of listeners who are dads or don't have children and that sort of thing too. But I think that there's just a lot of shoulds out there. And I think that what that does so much so is kind of takes away from, being in the present moment and just kind of living in that moment of, this is hard, but we'll get through it. I think that's kind of what I heard from you, Jojy, is like, there are going to be hard times, but then there's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's going to be okay. And we're going to all do the best that we can. And I think that that's something that we don't always remember in those moments, but it's definitely something that's important to reflect back on and to be able to kind of find your compass when things do get hard.
Yeah, and I will say the final thing too I want to comment is that since I'm the only one in this threesome that is like in the rearview mirror looking at parenting, is that our children are extremely resilient, and our intention is to be the best mom we can be to the children we have to raise, and they will make it, and we will be, that there's. I mean, I only wish that I trusted this back then when I was a new mom, is that, everything you're intending to do will come to pass. Our children will be what we want for them. And so you can let go of that like stress and the pressure, because everything is going to unfold exactly the way that it was meant to, and everybody will be okay. And so that's my reassurance to all of us, that it will all be good.
I really appreciate that, Jojy,
absolutely.
Too, because I think that a lot of times it just feels so heavy in the moment, and it just feels like, I don't know if they're going to be okay. Those doubts and that imposter syndrome, and like, oh, maybe it won't be okay. We're all just doing the best we can.
Absolutely. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us. It's a beautiful book. I really enjoyed it. And it really made me feel like, how do we get this book in every single person's hand? Because it is so wise.
Well, and I think I'll close this out. So again, if you want to, we'll make sure that our show notes have information to get a hold of Nancy and her book. And really, if this conversation has been something that you'd like to continue, please feel free to contact us. We'd love to hear from you here at the Deconstructed Woman as we continue to have these conversations. Nancy, thank you for your time, and thank you to our listeners. Please continue to let us know how we are doing and how this podcast is hitting you, and we hope to talk soon.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.